The Bob Murphy Show, episode 351.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews, conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Bob Murphy Show. We have yet another crossover episode with Adam Haman today. This discussion is going to be on the topic of drug legalization, and ideally you would have already been exposed to some libertarian making the case, because we're going to not so much from scratch make the case, but rather assume you've heard it and then talk about nuances involved and possible objections and so forth. So without further ado, here is yet another conversation that I had with Adam Haman.
Hey there, Bob.
Hey, Adam. How's it going?
I am fabulous. What's on your mind, good sir?
Well, I thought what we could do for this installment of our crossover series is talk about the libertarian case for drug legalization, both in theory and practice. The impetus for this is on X. See, I've fully transitioned. Now I feel better calling it X. I don't know
Big
why.
step. Big step.
Yep. It's yeah, I think I'll be all right. It's just take a little bit used to. Is I had another spat with Jeremy Kaufman, but this isn't about him. And it has come to my attention that I think some people believe that the libertarian case for drug legalization is, if we legalize this, usage will go down. And that if what we want, like we want fewer people dying from, fentanyl or whatever, that, you libertarians think if it were completely legal, then, nobody would use these harmful drugs anymore. And that's not what the case has ever been. I mean, sometimes libertarians bring up countervailing things like, it's a forbidden fruit and whatever there, but it was never, it's going to go down, or vice versa. I don't think any serious libertarian writer ever said that drug prohibition doesn't reduce the usage of those types of drugs. I think what they just say is it's certainly not eliminating it, and it just leads to all these other harmful consequences. So I thought it might be good to go through that. I know, Adam, you've talked about what happened in Portland, because that was something to come. Because the other thing, in terms of just the theory, what interested me is in response to when Jeremy and I were arguing about it, a few people chimed in saying, hey, I'm a libertarian, or I used to be. I used to totally buy into this, but then after various states, either outright legalized or whatever terminology, decriminalized, whatever, now I'm not so sure. Like these are failed experiments, and I know Portland was cited by many people as like, oh yeah, they tried your approach, Murphy, and they had to roll it back because it was such a disaster. So I thought it would be good, Adam, for you and I to talk about this stuff.
Oh, I totally agree. Three things. First, when you said you wanted to do a show on drugs, I figured you meant we'd do some. So I chose PCP and dropped some about 15 minutes ago. What did you do?
I will choose not to answer that, as my lawyer has advised me.
Things are going to get interesting. Yeah, when I saw the response on, all right, I'll go with you, X, that people say libertarianism have been arguing that legalizing drugs would lower the usage of it overall. I was like, I don't think I've ever heard anybody say that. I mean, have you?
Like I said, the only thing I can think of is people I have seen,
fruit,
yeah, make the forbidden few. But again, to me, it wasn't them saying that will make it, that'll more than offset the other thing. It was just to say, that there's a countervailing tendency.
When I saw that, I just thought, you could. The basic argument is that if you put friction on anything, you should expect to get less of it, or less of it. But as Austrians, we're not trying to say what the demand is going to be, simply because we don't know what's going to change in the culture. And that argument that maybe if you no longer say it's forbidden, that the teenagers aren't going to rebel and just go do a bunch of drugs to, stick it to the parents or whatever. I just thought it was a weird objection. And then, one of the things that frustrated me, you mentioned the show I did with my buddy Brian O'Leary called Natural Order Podcast, episode 15. You guys can check that out. naturalorderpodcast.com/EP15. He's from Oregon, and we talked about the drug legalization, quote unquote, that they tried in 2020 there. And it is objectively a disaster, but it's not like the government got out of the drug enforcement business. They did it all goofy and haphazard like governments do. They didn't completely decriminalize it. They just made a lesser infraction. And then they did, just one of the most anarcho-tyranny things they can do. Well, that's not true. What they normally do is the most anarcho-tyranny thing they can do. They'll make the peaceful activity of taking drugs, just putting a substance in your own body. They'll make that illegal, but then they'll allow all the horrible ancillary side effects, that come from drug use, like the homelessness and, peeing and defecating in the streets. They'll just act like that's no big deal. Anyway, I don't know where I'm going with that, but what the government response to all things relating to drug prohibition and the ancillary societal effects is just all screwed up. And it seems like hardly anybody is talking about it in the right frame.
Yeah, just to follow up on that particular thread. So that was one of the things that I noticed in the debates about it. It's like, oh yeah, you libertarians talking about it. And yeah, like I really want to be rubbing shoulders with a bunch of crackheads on the street, and they're coming, there's dirty, needles all over the thing, and guys are literally pooping on the sidewalk and everything. Yeah, give me more of that, please. My NAP. And so, like you say, Adam, it's unfortunate that that's the suite of services that the state provides to us. That they say, okay, the best we can do is decriminalizing, this, but we're not going to allow for private ownership of the state, and we're certainly not going to have the police go and enforce, basic civic order things and so
you
forth.
See, Bob, what freedom looks like is a guy living in a pitched tent in front of your business or shop, and there's nothing you can do about it. Freedom.
Right. So let me just mention, just in fairness, I understand. So I said something along those. No, the actual context, but it's related to this. Is somebody was talking about the opioid crisis and saying, "What are you talking about, Murphy? That's exactly what happened." And with that, and I said, okay, but in a totally free society, I think the deaths of despair and whatnot would go down. And so it wasn't like America in the mid 2000s was this great place with a great culture and foundation. And then so someone hit me up with the No True Scotsman and say, okay, well, you saw like a communist who said, oh yeah, we just didn't do it right. And give us another, get as a mulligan. And if your libertarianism would have worked. So I understand that. And I don't want to sound like Adam and I are saying, it didn't work in Portland because they had all those other things. But if you really wanted to see the benefits of drug legalization, you would have to first privatize all the roads and so that's, at least I don't want to speak for you. I'm not saying that. I am saying, yes, even other things equal, legalize, refraining from putting people in cages for selling plants to other people. That's always a good thing. It's not that I need to know, well, tell me the 9 other things that are in place first. I am just saying, though, notice the stuff people are pointing at. It's not just, the knowledge that there's someone in my city who's getting high inside of his property. That's not the issue. All the things they're pointing to as to why this was a terrible idea are problems with state management. So we're not out of line and being doctrinaire and evading the argument or something by just pointing that out.
Yeah, it's so weird to hear somebody, a libertarian advocating for drug prohibition. And the way I like to motivate it for conservative people who want safe streets for safe families without homeless, psychopathic, drugged out freaks bothering them like zombies on city streets, and the homeless living everywhere and camping and, the filth and the crime. The way I frame it usually is that, yes, you are right, conservatives, that when drug use is rampant in a society, it's bad. It, on the margins, ruins the drug user's life. It can wreck families. It can weaken society. That's all true. Problematic drug use leads to social lack of social cohesion and all these problems. You're absolutely right. But adding prohibition on top of that just magnifies that problem, because you don't actually get rid of any drug use, really. I mean, as we learned in Prohibition with alcohol, and as we're learning now with drugs everywhere in America, what you do add, though, is all the evils of prohibition, such as police corruption, the communities not trusting the police because they're interfering, in peaceful behavior. Violence runs rampant. You get gangs, you get all the evils of black markets, you get poisoned product because these things aren't, your dope isn't being made by Tylenol in a safe factory. It's made by, some goofball. And I just don't understand why conservatives who want a clean, peaceful, prosperous society think that adding a huge evil, prohibition, on top of a smaller evil, occasional drug use, how they think that's an improvement. It just seems nuts to me.
Yeah, just to avoid confusion, so Jeremy Kaufman was not for drug prohibition, but the people chiming in the argument,
right.
Many of them were. Jeremy's position was just to state, again, not that this episode is a response to him. His position was, I am still for drug legalization, and he listed why, but he said, and he was responding to me and saying, but the standard libertarians have to be honest with what their case is to the public, because they've been dishonest or ignorant up till now. And that's what,
do you think that's an honest reframing of quote unquote the libertarian position on drugs? Because it doesn't seem like he's being accurate.
No, that's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
So I guess this is a response to that claim by him, is what I'm saying. I'm saying I don't want to keep dwelling on the rest of his tweet, but yes, Adam, that's the point. That's why I was like, what are you talking about? That's not no libertarian has ever said that, as far as I can tell. Certainly that was never the linchpin. So for people wondering, like, okay, well, maybe you guys should tell us what is besides just the principled argument, though, but the standard argument for like alcohol legalization and drug legalization. By the way, before I forget, in my Lessons for the Young Economist, which you can get the free PDF, folks, at Mises.org. So again, the name of the book is Lessons for the Young Economist. I have a chapter on drug legalization, and I would encourage you to look at it. I think I did a good job of distilling down the main arguments and clarifying them. And maybe in this discussion, Adam, I'll later get to the point where I do think libertarians drop the ball a lot. But the basic argument is mostly what people have in mind when they think of the evils of drug addiction or whatever isn't because of the substance itself. It's because of the prohibition. So like drive-by shootings and stuff like that, that's clearly all the gang violence that we associate with drugs. That's 100% attributable to the prohibition. And we know that because under alcohol prohibition with a capital P, you had gangland violence, Al Capone and St. Valentine's Day Massacre and all that stuff. That was all happening with alcohol. Once they legalized it, boom. It's not like executives at Budweiser would have a drive-by shooting of somebody from Heineken. Like that wouldn't make any sense. It's not because they're better people. It's just that wouldn't make any sense business-wise. It's not worth it. And so, in my chapter, I spell out, if you want to just see the argument step by step as to what specifically, why is it that violence gets associated with the drug trade, among other things. Once you're dealing in something that's already illegal, well, then you automatically, you have to be paying off cops. You got to be paying off judges and obviously. So you're already doing it. So then on the margin for you to you use violence isn't, the marginal cost of using violence in that once you already have that infrastructure, you're going to prison for 50 years if the system turns against you. So, once you're in that spot, then yes, you're willing to use violence or whatever. And then also the kind of person who ends up running organizations in that environment is someone with that is very, a high risk taker and stuff like that. So anyway, it just selects for different people and the incentives are totally different. But that is the standard libertarian argument, that all these evils we associate with it would largely disappear. And the other one main thing I'll just say, and before I forget, is that the purity of the drug or the alcohol, whatever, alcohol is a drug, it also gets degraded under prohibition. Okay, so if you're talking about fentanyl deaths and a lot of what we call overdoses right now are because people weren't sure of the quality of the product. If you were getting it from name brand companies, maybe with a prescription or, that wouldn't happen as much. Okay. And so and we see this under alcohol prohibition. there were lots more people. The rate of people dying from alcohol poisoning went up. Certainly, if you confine it to the people who still drank. All right, I think it's still true of the overall population, but for sure, drinking alcohol became way more dangerous under Prohibition. Not least of which is because the government itself deliberately encouraged the use of like industrial alcohols to get put into the black market that was literally poisonous. But I think even beyond that, and one of the mechanisms in that is if you're in the black market and you're going to go to some guy who's distilling in his cabin in the woods or something, and that's where you're getting your alcohol from because it's illegal, you're not going to go and get a 12-pack of light beer. You're going to go and get a flask of whiskey or whatever, right? So there's some data. Mark Thornton has a good article. Of course, we'll link to all this stuff, folks. But the total expenditure on distilled spirits is a percentage of total alcohol sales, right? So in other words, of people spending money on alcohol, what percent was for spirits as opposed to beer? It was like 40% on the eve of Prohibition, and then it jumped up to like the high 80s. Okay, so again, just showing people switched out of softer alcohol and into the harder stuff under Prohibition.
Oh, that's a great point I hardly even thought of. But yeah, one of the many evils is that if you make it risky to transport, there's an automatic incentive to concentrate the drug. So you're going to get more concentrated, more concentrated. You get that, and then the thing you just sip on, over the course of the,
you're not going to see. Time you got to go see your guy again.
I'll have to check my local historian, but I don't think there were many Bartles and James wine coolers during Prohibition. I think they were selected out by Al Capone.
So that's why if what you're associating with, if you're talking about people with drug addiction, that was the thing. Again, I keep saying I'm not responding to Jeremy. I guess I am partly, but the way he originally framed it, and that was the thing I could tell in the comments, a lot of his fans thought I was digging in my heels and saying, no, I don't know that alcohol consumption went down during the 20s. No, yes, it did. That's Jeffrey Myron and the co-author have like the definitive article on that. It didn't. It rebounded, right? So I think the long-term thing, it was only like maybe a 30% reduction or something. So again, it's people were going to speakeasies and it kind of became cool and blah, blah, blah. But it did go down. But the point is Jeremy didn't talk about that. He was talking about like alcoholism and stuff. And there I was saying, I'm not sure because yes, fewer people are drinking total, but of the people that do drink now, instead of it just being like, oh yeah, having a glass of wine with dinner, it's no, you got to go somewhere where you're with a bunch of other people who are there breaking the law. So it's kind of fun. And given that you're going to go do that, you're probably not going to have a sip of wine and go back home. No, you're going to, get hammered.
You're going to lock the doors and party. Yeah, I mean, we're breaking the law here, right?
so it's, again, and so we will link to some of that stuff. I wish I had better hard numbers. I have articles, like I said, that Jeffrey Myron one is like the gold standard in this literature. And he relied on those data to like estimate drinking, like with cirrhosis cases and blah, blah, blah. But he doesn't just give you the raw numbers. So I can't just tell you, because then we saw in this year, then this percent of alcohol cases or people getting checked in to the hospital for drunken or getting arrested for drunkenness or whatever. But anyway, it's that is the argument. And so if what you're worried about now are like, oh my gosh, all these ODs and stuff and people ruining their lives, and I think you would have fewer people ruining their lives. That the argument seemed to be once someone takes some kind of mood altering substance, boom, that's down the path and they're going to be dead at some point. And how do we stop that? And I'm saying, no, the fact that this stuff is, still in a regulatory limbo, that's, in other words, you can't just go and get easy access to some of these opioids. Like there was a crackdown on doctors overprescribing it and stuff. And now it's flipped where genuine pain patients can't get what they need because the doctors are afraid that they're going to get their license revoked if they're seen, writing too many scripts for painkillers. So
it's funny how public perception just got so weird. Like anytime anybody takes an opioid, that's just an automatic path to dependency. And that's just not true. Most people don't have any problems with these things. A whole bunch of people get nauseous when they take them. It's just on the margins that you'll run into people have a problem. I have a weird topic I want to run by you and see what you think.
Can I ask you? I don't want to. Are you going to forget if I ask you?
No.
Okay. Can you just go back, because you kind of went off on a tangent. I don't think you actually finished what you're saying about the Portland because you made the point on the episode of, with your other, with your previous boyfriend. And so but you didn't get it out here. Like you were saying, it was still illegal to produce it, right? It was just they decriminalized the possession.
They decriminalized possession, and I think they made it like a misdemeanor with a diversion towards a treatment program and all this other stuff. And I wanted to touch on what they actually did because it brings up my larger point, which is that, we libertarians are always saying that the government should be, get out of the way and legalize drugs. And then the only instances we ever see of it in the real world are these Frankenstein. They're not what libertarians want. They're just some weird Frankenstein version. Like when marijuana was legalized in Oregon, I'm pretty sure this is true. It was sold like it is in most places in the country as a revenue generation mechanism, and the money will be funded into public schools. That's almost always what they do. And then in 2020, when they passed this bill that legalized so much more, it was funny because they put in this bait and switch where they carved out a huge chunk of that money they were generating from the marijuana sales, taxed and licensed and regulated, and they were diverting it towards a bunch of weird drug-related community organization programs that just on the face of it just look crooked as all hell. They look like bureaucratic fiefdoms, the kind that you read about where nothing really changes, but a bunch of people just get hired. And it just seemed, if you only passed the referendum in Oregon because you thought, well, okay, our schools will get better. It's not great. I'm not really for legalizing marijuana, but at least our schools finally get funded, these crappy government schools. And then to find out that the government is always just giving you that bait and switch and taking it away from you later. But the larger point is, what do we do as libertarians when we advocate for the government just getting out of the way and having freedom and free markets, freedom of association, private property, and we just never get it? Like they're not enforcing private property as they in Oregon, as I said, as they legalize possession, because they just let people act like lunatics. But
that's critical, right? So it's not that name brand companies could come in and give quality products in vacuum sealed bags and blah blah blah.
And I assume it was all still gangs doing the distributing, because that's still illegal, the possession for large quantities. So what are you exactly legalizing? Just a fraction of it?
Right. And again, I realize we come off like communist or something. Oh, they just didn't do it right, or we didn't do it enough. We just need more. But like with the so-called electricity deregulation California, where they deregulated the wholesale market, but they kept the price controls on the retail residential stuff because, we can't just have homeowners electric bills tripling or something. That's crazy. And many economists warned beforehand that they just ex post come up with some excuse why their libertarianism failed. And they're saying if you do that, if you allow the wholesale price to skyrocket when conditions are like that in the market, but then the people selling it can't raise the price accordingly, you're going to have blackouts. What do you think's going to happen? If the wholesale price jumps and you're not allowed to even break even, you're just going to stop producing in that period until wholesale prices come down. And lo and behold, they had rolling blackouts or brownouts or whatever they call them. And people were saying, geez, we tried the free market electricity and it didn't work. And so we're not, I don't think, being the no true Scotsman by saying, of course, that isn't great. And that's, if you're going to deregulate, then go ahead and deregulate. But don't do this tiny little tweak and then say, we tried free markets and laissez-faire and it didn't work, because electricity is a special kind of thing where voluntary private property respect doesn't work. And just like with other types of drugs, that freedom leads to disaster in that area. And to just tweak it where you're still in trouble, like you said, all the things that people associate with it, that if some big company came in and tried to mass produce that stuff and sell it with name brand recognition, so if there was an OD, that company would be, the name brand or something would be hurt. No, that's all still illegal. And it's not that you can go and just the CVS starts selling cocaine in Portland. And so it's, call that what you will. But I had a lot of people telling like, they tried open sale, anything goes, and it blew up in their faces. And like you're saying, it's certainly the sidewalks and the police and everybody were still run by the state.
I've got a messy real world question for you, and I'll motivate it by bringing up school choice. Like, as libertarians, we know we want complete privatization of the whole thing, just a complete separation of government and education. But I think that educational savings accounts are a reasonable step on the way from the horrible system we have now towards a completely free system. And other smart people, I think you included, disagree. And I don't want to argue about that here, but I want to take that logic and apply it to drugs. We advocate complete freedom. This is just a product. It should be for sale on the open market like any other. Maybe some restrictions for children or whatever, but by and large, just make it like alcohol. Since that's almost never on offer, the proposed measures are always some sort of scheme to license, regulate, and control various aspects of it. Should libertarians argue against those half measures because they're not the full libertarian ideal, or how do you answer a messy question like that?
Yeah. So again, it is tricky with this stuff because you don't want to. Two things. You're not ever going to get anywhere if you're going to say, no, I insist on absolute Rothbardia or else nothing, right. Or I walk. Okay, then nothing's going to happen in your lifetime for sure. Absent we come up with interdimensional travel and can go somewhere.
Can't rule it out.
Yeah. So there's that, but also I certainly don't want to like ex post, like I say, like once you are behind something and it doesn't work, and you say, well, that's because there was still, the government was asserting the validity of weights and measures, and so therefore, this tax cut didn't work. So there is that. So that's why I'm hesitant. I think that the consistent libertarian, like Murray Rothbard's position on this stuff, just in general, not about educational reform or drug legalization per se, but just in general, he was always saying any genuine reduction in state aggression is a good thing. And so if somebody says, hey, let's lower the income tax rate from 40% to 30%, we should welcome that. It's not that you would say, oh, but that's still 30% theft. That's crazy. Like, yeah, going to zero would be better, but moving from 40 to 30 is an unambiguous W, take it.
And but that's the very rare pure case where it's
right.
Just a reduction on the same metric.
So that, so that's, there is that element, but I'm saying some people, even that's progress though, because some people don't like, or like giving tax credits or whatever. Like there are some people, self-described libertarians who were really upset when under Trump, the Republicans pushed through that big overhaul of the tax code. There were some, I'll mention him, Scott Sumner was really mad that they left in the tax incentives for healthcare, for health insurance. And that, this is why your employer is providing all these Cadillac plans and stuff like that. Like he was really upset. His biggest complaint was that the Republicans left that in there because in his view, for the same amount of revenue, you could lower rates across the board if you got rid of all these different deductions and blah, blah, blah. And I get his point, but, so he was mad that they didn't just get rid of a deduction, which would have raised. So I'm just saying Rothbard's point is what it is. The other one, I don't know if I said it with you, Adam, on the previous thing, but there are even cases where that is tricky, where you could say libertarians are against the government handing out food to people, right? Oh, yeah, totally. Okay, so for the guys that are in federal prison right now, we should just stop feeding them. Right. So there are cases like that where if you just, I know what it was Scott talking about banking deregulation, and that even Ron Paul apparently was saying, we shouldn't get rid of Glass. Was it Glass-Steagall or was it something else?
Yeah, I think so.
The thing, that was dividing, banking and or commercial investment banking. Had these to say what we can't do is quote deregulate and allow banks to do more things while there still is FDIC in place and the Fed's implicit put and all that, where the bankers know if you suffer big losses, you're going to get bailed out, but go ahead and do whatever the heck you want. Like that, Scott was saying that it's a sensible thing as a libertarian to say, okay, given these other things are in place, you can't just unwind that one particular government feature, even though in a free society, that particular thing wouldn't be there. So there are cases like that. With the drug stuff, though, I don't think, Adam, you could say as a libertarian, like, yeah, I think we need to keep heroin illegal until we get rid of the welfare state or until we privatize the streets. I would have trouble saying that.
Right. I'm with you. I feel the same way. And my general answer to the problem is that I think we should always be advocating for the pure solution. And occasionally, we'll take steps that are a little bit more piecemeal when they make sense. Would you have objected, like if you were the deciding vote in California as to that partial deregulation that was obviously going to lead to a disaster, would you have voted for or against that?
I'm not sure because I don't understand the exact property arrangements.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like if it was at all driven by some of the stuff was quote publicly owned and then it was just the policies they were setting, then that's kind of different to me than like if the government owns a bridge, I don't think that the optimal toll is $0 because otherwise it's, you know what I mean? Like it's kind of a weird thing where if you're operating, or maybe a better one is interstate highways that, no, we're not going to privatize them. That's off the table. Given that they exist, should there be a speed limit? I don't think it's an extra amount of aggression to say you can't go more than 85. Okay. I mean, we can quibble up what the number should be, but I don't think a speed limit per se, given that we all agree the government's going to own it, is that.
Have to set some reasonable rules. Yeah.
Yeah. So with the California thing, I hesitate to giving you an answer because I don't know exactly. I'm sure the government probably owns some key infrastructure at places and they could have gotten the outcome they wanted just by doing that. In which case, I could have plausibly said, well, no, then that's a bad idea to quote deregulate in that peaceful fashion. If all you were really doing was changing the policy of some of those government owned enterprises.
I got another weird idea to take it back to one of your many Twitter battles with this guy who was claiming that libertarians are always saying that if you legalize drugs, you'll get less drug use, which again is weird. I've never heard anybody say that except for the forbidden fruit argument you made. But then as I'm sitting here thinking about it, I'm going to argue that very thing just to see how far I can push it.
Is it because the PCP is kicking in?
It really is, man. You look like a dragon, a green one. It's weird. No, I'm just saying if you could snap your fingers and live in Rothbardia, no central bank, no evil government doing evil things, just private property, freedom of association. We work out our problems like civilized human beings. I do think if you could just snap your fingers and find yourself in that world, especially say after it had been acting for a century or two, I do think there'd be a lot less substance abuse in a world like that because I think you'd get less social decay in a world that isn't riddled with the evil that is, the monopoly use of force on peaceful people. I think we'd have a more healthy society, if we not only legalized, just heroin, say, but if we actually did live in a free society. I do think it'd be more healthy and people wouldn't be so subject to despair and feel like they don't have any prospects for exerting effort into this world. And so instead turn inwards to drug abuse and all the evils that come with it. So there, I did make the argument.
Right. But again, like that's, what am I trying to say? Because I think you're doing the full Monty with that.
Yeah.
Right. So, but if it was just the one thing, and also too, we usually say these things, other things equal.
Yep.
Right. So, but yeah, I think probably people wouldn't buy as much from fast food places by what we can consider to be right now, like that kind of a food, probably, even though, but you guys would get rid of taxes. So wouldn't the Big Mac become even cheaper? Yes, it would. But then all these other things too, right now that aren't available or that are really expensive would become affordable. And then people would have so much more disposable income and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. So I think that is also true as well. But again, that's not even a violation of standard economics. They're just saying other things equal, the lower the price is, the more you demand.
Yeah, I was cheating, and I don't mean to insist that if you just legalize drugs that you get less drug use right away. I don't think that's true.
But I agree. I mean, that's partly when we try to understand like the opioid crisis or whatever. I don't think you could just do it in a vacuum. I think you do need to look at, well, gee, why is it that like the life expectancy of American men, especially like white men, fell for a couple of years there. I haven't looked recently to see if it's turned around. I'm assuming it has, and there was a lot of overlap with like vets and stuff, I'm I'm not saying this is the whole thing, but like people going over to Afghanistan and just seeing some crazy stuff and coming back. I mean, there were a lot of people, I think, in that category. And they, as you say, they called them deaths of despair. It wasn't deaths of lower marginal cost. You know what I mean? So it's not that the deregulation, and that's the thing too. I don't know that there was this big experiment. I think it was just partly like some of these things came to market and whatever. Like I don't remember that there was in the mid 2000s that George W. Bush signed the Opioid Legalization Act or something. So
no, I think it was an invention.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So, but again, that was still covered with prescription laws. You know what I mean? So it's weird to me that, as often happens in this stuff, when something bad happens under a tightly regulated market, people say, "Oh, there's laissez-faire for you."
Right.
And again, I'm not doing I don't think I'm doing a no true Scotsman thing here. That it's not the. I mean, there's all kinds of crazy. Like I know, senior citizen apartment complexes and stuff where younger kids would go there to buy the drugs from, you know what I mean? Like there was somebody who was an elderly person who was getting prescribed painkillers from their doc because they said, "Oh yeah, my back's killing me," or whatever, and then they were selling it to teenagers. You know, I mean, there's all kinds of stuff like that. So say what you will about that, but that's not a laissez-faire functioning market where, you know, the big drug companies are selling directly to the consumer with ads on television or something. That's not what that is. So you can say that still maybe it's a bad idea and we should keep it outright prohibited and not even let those senior citizens get access to these things. But it's not, oh yeah, that's libertarianism 101 for you.
Yeah, no, definitely not. You're familiar with Seyfeddin Ammous? I don't know how you pronounce his last name, the Fiat Standard guy. And then I think he wrote a book where he accused the central bank and artificial money of just poisoning basically everything that we do. Are you familiar with that thesis? And you know, do you think that's the case?
I haven't read I've read portions of the Bitcoin Standard. I mean, I've seen him give talks and podcast interviews and stuff. I think I know the basic gist, and I'm largely on board with that. But yeah, that's what I'm saying. Like people complaining about people buying crappy foods and whatever. Like it's a big, all this stuff kind of goes in together. And I'm going to start sounding like RFK Jr. or something. But I do think that yes, all this stuff kind of goes together, and cheap fiat money that's flowing through politically connected channels is a necessary condition for all these things to have gotten as bad as they've gotten.
I totally agree. And I'm not going to tell the law or your family or anybody, but I've deduced that it's speed. I did PCP, and I believe you've done speed. Did you have any more points you wanted to hit on?
Well, yeah, before I forget, let me just mention, I had teased the audience in the chapter from Lessons for the Young Economist on drug prohibition. I hit back against a lot of times when people are making the standard case from a libertarian perspective for drug legalization, they'll say, "Oh, and the reason there's more gang violence or something is because there's no property rights." So, like, you know, if you're supposed to do a deal with somebody and you're going to sell him a bunch of drugs for a suitcase full of cash, and then you guys go meet in a parking garage and you park your cars and you pop the trunk, and then his boys just rob you at gunpoint, you can't just call the police and say, "Hey, I was selling a bunch of cocaine." So that's true, but they're making it sound like, oh, the reason there's this bad outcome here is that you don't have access to this vital police service or this vital government service, namely police protection. And so, it's the problem is that the police are refraining from helping you, and that's where things go. And no, that's wrong. Just think through the consequences. The reason you're meeting in a parking garage is because if you met, somewhere else, the government would come and shut you down.
Yeah, it's not that the police are threatening to withhold service. It's
right.
that they're promising that they will come serve.
And even, and I've seen people too talk about, no, there's certain areas where the police don't even go there, man. And it's no, that's like basically drugs de facto legal there. And yeah, like on the corner, gang members selling it or whatever, it's true. The police aren't going to send in 10 cars to go lock that down and arrest those guys. But if you said, you know what, it is, there's the quality here. And I know guys have gotten robbed at gunpoint and stuff. And so I'm going to open up a storefront and install bulletproof glass and have multi-chambered entry. And then you just go in there with your cash and No, the local pastor would go on the 6 o'clock news and say, in broad daylight, this business has a storefront and there's like lines out the door and they're doing this much. The mayor would have to shut that down, just for PR reasons. Okay, so it is not true that the reason you're vulnerable to being robbed if you're a drug dealer under a prohibited system is because the government legal system isn't there to help you out and enforce your property rights. No, it's the other way around, that the police are, they will come in and shut you down. Like any kind of voluntary system that could come up for private security or whatever, the police will come if that gets to be too big and knock that out. Say, no, you guys are forming an army. You can't do that. And so that's, again, my whole point with all this is that you will often see libertarians making the case for drug legalization, will say the reason under Prohibition you have violence and gangland squabbles and stuff is because people who get aggressed upon can't call the police for protection. And I'm saying, no, that's not it. There would be private firms who would give you protection. But the police would shut them down. So the problem's not the police won't help me. The problem is the police will stop me from hiring people to help me. And so say what you will about that, but that's not a problem of inadequate government help and intervention into the society.
Yeah, well said. I just had a weird thought. It's probably not a fair question. Let's say we're not in Rothbardia, we're in Hans Hermann Hoppe, and you've just got a bunch of covenant communities, and Jeremy Kaufman's in charge of one, and I don't know, maybe he and his ilk have instituted a county-wide, it's not like a monopolistic government. You got to sign the CC&Rs to get in there, and you agree to a bunch of stuff. But if one of the things you're agreeing to is a police state in your little zone, do you think that what would end up happening is, basically a little mini version of the black markets that we suffer now, just on a smaller scale? I mean, just because we've eliminated the monopoly part or made it a contractual thing, it doesn't really change human nature. Like, they're still going to have kids, right? And the kids are going to want to do whatever they want to do. It's a weird question. I know, I can't imagine you've thought about it, but
I thought something similar. So just more in general, I've dealt with the objection that what if there was a big, some rich guy in Ancapistan world goes to he buys all of the real estate in a city, let's say Pittsburgh. And then he just says, just on a lark, I want to recreate Pittsburgh back in the days of when there was a state. And so everybody agrees, so anyone coming and visiting, like if it's a touristy thing, like, oh, hey, everybody, there's like taxation and bureaucrats, and people are like, whoa, I want to go, like they're going to Jurassic Park or something. And hey, it's kind of dangerous. The police here, if they stop you and shoot you, they have immunity. Isn't that crazy, kids? That kind of thing. And so I just walked through that, and I was saying, so on the one hand, you could say, oh, but the principles there. But on the other hand, it's not like, even if they had the contractual right to levy taxes, they wouldn't have in place policies, I think, that wouldn't make economic sense. Right. So this kind of does turn into Hoppe's argument about like a monarchy, whether it be incentives there. So likewise here, that yes, some private owner, some rich guy, if he bought up all the real estate and he set rules that mimicked what the state at the various levels does right now, that wouldn't be initiating aggression so long as everybody entering in there, fully signed off on and acknowledged, yep, every 4 years we're all going to vote. And then there's going to be this thing called the Constitution, and and that's how and if they decide they can just take that much of my income, if they want to send my kid to go die in a war, they have the right to do that. I agree. It might be tricky with your kids because they're, right now you can't sign away your kids, but in general, you get the idea for anyone who entered voluntarily as an adult. But my point is, besides just some weird guy who would just pay people to punch themselves in the face, which I guess technically could happen, why would they do that? What would be the incentive? Like, in other words, what the state does now, it's so crazy and counterproductive. It's not just that it's evil, it's also really inefficient and just stupid. And so I think you'd see a lot of that stuff that would get quickly, winnowed away. And also, like you say, the neighborhood, the surrounding areas of competition of more sensible things. Why would people move into that place?
Right. I really brought the question up just to illustrate the point that libertarians are often accused of being utopian, and that's just not true. There are no solutions. There are only trade-offs. And, even in this crazy scenario I constructed and that you constructed, it's not going to be a panacea. There's going to be issues based on the culture or whatever, but it's just better than having the monopoly provision of force that, nobody can contract out of.
I mean, so certainly there could be communities that are dry. Like you say, if everybody going in there, or at least the adults, the kids get dragged against their will, and that's children in general are a thorny issue in this stuff. But yeah, they could do that. There could be communities that say no one here's getting an abortion. We consider that murder. And, you could do that. And certainly, you better not let us catch you. Being able to smell that you're smoking something, or else you get in trouble. We can figure out where it's coming from. They could do that, just like they can say you can't have a beat up car on your lawn.
Sure.
That there's no violation of libertarian principles so long as when the developer set up the neighborhood, that's what the deal was for people buying into that as outsiders. So that's certainly all totally fine, and there's nothing unlibertarian about that. And I think that's great that you would get healthy competition among various places, and people could go where they wanted to. Some people wanted, like, they were young and partying, and they just love the idea of, oh yeah, it's like Mardi Gras every day. There'd be areas catering to that. There'd be other places where no, after 9 p.m. it's quiet hours, and you can't be having a raging party. So I think you would see that natural selection.
Yep, contracts are cool. I think we're about ready to wind down. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I made all the points that I wanted to.
I'd like to encourage people to check out one of my other podcasts, Natural Order. It's available everywhere, and specifically episode 15, where Brian and I talked about Oregon, because not only did we flesh out in more detail the interesting little experiment they did and its horrible effects, but as an added bonus, Brian and I completely solved the drug addiction and homelessness problem. You're welcome. So go check it out. naturalorderpodcast.com/EP15.
Well, that's tantalizing.
Yeah, I mean, how can you resist that? How can you resist that?
I hope somebody doesn't have like a job or some responsibility they got to deal, because now they got to just let that go and go listen to that episode.
I mean, I suspect several servers are crashing as we speak. And I'd also like to direct people to hamannature.substack.com and my show, Haman Nature, on YouTube. And it is wonderful, as always, talking to you, Bob. I always learn something, and I love these crossover episodes.
I do as well, Adam. And for folks, if you want to see the links to this, what Adam and I have been talking about, certainly you can go through his best, or it's going to be bobmurphyshow.com/351 is how this will shake out when I post it on my site. So we'll have the links to Adam's episode, my lessons for the young economist, and so forth. And I'll link to some like Mark Thornton's work on the alcohol prohibition, stuff like that.
Good stuff. All right. Pleasure. Good night, good folks.
So long, everybody.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.